we've been talking in India about a 7% growth rate, and it is a wonderful feeling, although as you and many others have pointed out, the data is not 100% kosher.
Yes.
However, let's say it is 7%. Even that 7%, even with the new data, is going to be tougher than ever before this year to achieve. And you're not talking about demonetization. You're talking about many other factors.
Yes.
We are post-demonetization.
Right.
Been there, done that. So you say that it's 7% growth is harder to achieve than ever before in 2017. Why? Let's have a look at the number of countries at the moment and earlier that are growing above 7%. In the 4 or 5 years between 2003 and 2007, 50 countries grew above 7% GDP a year. In 2008 to 2015, 25 countries around the world grew a GDP of above 7% a year. And now, 2016, only 6 countries are growing above 7%?
Yeah, so this is what really tells you about.
And this, sorry, out of 188 countries.
Yes, that's right. Okay. So this is about how much the global economy has changed in the post-crisis world. There is not a single region or single major country I know which is growing at the same pace as it was before 2008. So the baseline for economic success has to change everywhere. And I think that this is where we don't quite adjust our own expectations, which is that we still sort of keep looking at the reference point of the last decade when the global economy was booming and we grew at 8 to 9%, on how to get back to 8 to 9% kind of economic growth. Well, what we have to understand is that growing at 8 to 9% in this world where the global economy is barely growing at 2.5%, maybe 3% on the upside, in that environment for any country to grow at a rate of more than 7% is going to be extremely difficult, because the 6 countries, if you look at the list of the 6 countries, many of those are countries like, I think there are countries like Iraq on that list, Ivory Coast, some of these countries which are really Tanzania or Myanmar,
right,
very small, newly opening
from
economies.
From a small base,
I mean, from a much smaller base, which are just about sort of growing very rapidly. So to be in that mix is going to be extremely difficult. The only other country in Asia which comes close to growing at 7% these days is the Philippines. But the game has become that much more difficult. So I think that this is also something for us. It's very difficult for us to quite internalize this, but the fact that if we can't achieve more than 7% growth, we should not sort of kill ourselves too much. Understanding that the global economy is now growing at a much slower pace than it was for the factors we have just spoken about, which has to do with the population growth rate trends and also some of the other factors we'll speak about going forward, from deglobalization to too much debt.
It's very important where your rank is in the world in terms of how well you're doing. That's what happens in your classroom as well.
Right.
So 10 years ago, if you were growing at 7%, you were like in the 35th or 40th. Now, if you're growing at 5%, you're going in the 35th or 40th or even 20th.
Yeah.
So even 5%, you're not doing that badly relative to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and that's why I've been so critical of India's GDP data, saying that that what it's throwing out is complete nonsense, because just look at what's happening in the global economy, and you're telling us something which is so different, even though it feels very different on the ground as well. But anyway, I think the bigger point here is that a reset of expectations needs to happen everywhere. And yes, if we can sort of grow faster than that, great for us, but I'm not holding my breath for India to grow above 7% for too long.